all for coming to our first installment of Parents in the Know. Getting to know your child's brain. That ought to be interesting, huh? No, I'd like to thank Suncoast Kids for hosting this. They really do want you to be intentional about your parenting, and so this is an opportunity for you to do that. So I applaud you for coming and doing that. So I would like to introduce you to our panel, and I forgot my paperwork. Dave, hand me that. So the greatest things about these, one of the things about these ladies is that cumulatively they have more degrees than a thermometer. But the best thing about them is that they are really in the trenches with kids of every age and every ability, and so they really do know what they're talking about. Our first panelist is Autumn McConnell, and she's the former executive director of European Academy for Early Education, and she is the owner of Summer Success Institute. So help me welcome Autumn. Next, we have Stacy Homan, who is the ESE teacher for Sarasota Suncoast Academy, and she is also the ESE director and liaison for, for Sarasota Suncoast Academy and Middle School. And finally, we have April Tisdale, AKA also one of my besties there. And she is most recently part of the ESE Student Services Support Services at Sarasota Military Academy. But she is the current owner of SCC Tutorial Services. So they know what they're talking about. So I'm going to let them take it over. But first, you're probably going to have some questions. So during the presentation, if you have any questions, we will have a number on the screen for you. Do we have that number? We will have a number on the screen for you. And you can text your questions. We're not even going to yell at you for having your phones out. Like, isn't that great? So you can text your questions to that number, and at the end, we will have some time for Q&A, and hopefully we'll be able to get to all your questions. So without further ado, Parents in the Know.
All right, let me set my timer. Okay. So we're starting our 45-minute talk before we answer some of your questions, if we get to that. I feel like Susan gave a lot of letters right there. So I'm going to let us just kind of, in layman's terms, the best we can, kind of give why and how we ended up kind of being here today on the stage. So Autumn, why don't you start?
Okay, I'll give the brief history of what I've done. So let's see, I graduated from University of South Florida with my elementary education degree, and then I got a job with Sarasota County Public Schools. I was there for 8 years, and in the meantime, I obtained my master's degree in teaching and learning with a specialization in mathematics. I don't tell too many people that. It makes me look like a nerd. But
You're making good company.
And then after I was a teacher for a couple years, I moved into administration with the public school system, and then I was recruited into principalship at a private school locally, and I was there for 8 years, and that was early childhood education. Now I've actually just started my own company. It's Summer Success Institute, and I'm super excited because it's an academic-based summer camp that will actually be held here this summer. So our community needed something like that, so I developed it. And I got asked to come here, and I feel blessed to be here and talk to you. Hopefully I can give you some information that will be helpful, and you'll come away with knowing more than you did when you came in.
Yeah, so Autumn is kind of our younger expert for kids, because she's got kind of the younger end with the preschool and that kind of thing. So April, tell us how you ended up here.
Actually, I started out in preschool. I owned my own preschool for 7 years, and I taught kindergarten for 6 years. And as I grew older, I needed to move up with older children. My energy level wasn't there as much. And as my own personal kids, I'm a mother of two, 28 and a 30-year-old. So I moved up. I've actually taught at a middle school level. I was a reading specialist for 7 years, and I've spent the last 8 years case managing at the high school level. I had 134 ESE kids on my caseload, identified as all different learning differences and styles, and I just retired last week to fulfill more of my tutoring service. I've been running a tutoring center for about 1.5 years, and so I work with reading and writing in the content area.
Excellent. So she's been a resource for years with some sensory strategies as well, so we're going to get to some of those. Just a quick background on myself. I have taught at Suncoast Academy, which is here, our charter school. This is my 13th year teaching there. I taught music 1 year, which wore me out. But I have been the ESE teacher, which is the special education teacher, for the last 12 years. And I finished my master's in May from USF in special education. And so in the last couple years, I've taken over a little bit more of the leadership position in the school with running more of the meetings and doing more liaison things with paperwork and helping with some of the staff with interventions and that kind of thing. I also have 3 children of my own. I have a 7th grader, a 4th grader, and a 2nd grader. And my 2nd grader has had some learning difficulties himself. He's doing fantastic and has come so far, but as a parent, I've walked kind of that pathway with learning about my own children and some learning differences and the things that have really helped. I went to therapy with him multiple times a week while he was in preschool and up. So I kind of have a parent perspective now as well, which is really helpful. All right, so that kind of gives us, and we're all a little bit self-learners, so we put together a book list for you, and that's going to be available in the back, but we brought a few things to share with you tonight and some of the readings and things that we've done. So let's start out and talk a little bit about routine and structure. So Autumn, you want to tell us a little bit about how important routine and structure is for kids?
It's so important. It's probably the most important thing, honestly. They, especially starting with the little ones, even when they're born, scheduling their sleep schedule, and I mean, just on through preschool and up to high school. But the routine is so important. Kids need to feel like they can predict what's going to happen, and they know what the consequences are. And routine is just really important. Setting a schedule for snack time, setting a schedule for when they come home, they eat a snack, they sit down at the table, they do their homework, they read a book, they go back to playing, and then they come back in, they bath, bedtime story, brushing teeth, all of that. Just having the consistency of the schedule is so important.
It definitely is. April, you want to kind of jump on how that affects
And
us as
I
well?
think what one of the biggest, and this is on my book list with less sticky notes, late, lost, and unprepared. One of the biggest issues we see at the high school level is that it seems as if routines are established with the early childhood. They have a nap schedule, a feeding schedule, and those routines help them be successful. But then the parents kind of stop somewhere along the way, and there's no sleep schedule. If you ask a student, do you have a bedtime? No. What is your plan? Do you have a place to study? No. What is your meal time? Well, I grab fast food and I go and eat it in my room. Or so by not having routines, a lot of our students, it's not academic that is the problem that they see, but it's more of they don't turn in their papers. Oh, I did it. It might be in my car, or it could be under my bed. There's no place for things. So that's one of the things that I really work on a lot with my students, is helping them. I'll say, what is your plan for success, and how can I help you? Can we say, this is where I'm going to study, or this is when I am going to study? And a lot of them have jobs. A lot of them have extracurriculars. They're in sports. So it's a management system, and I feel like so many of our students get thrown to the wolves when they get to high school. I tried to teach them to use this device, which I have mixed feelings. Sometimes I really love the smartphone for our students, but I feel like they get sucked into so many different other things at a high school level. But I talk to them about putting in their calendars, setting reminders, using agendas. I use a visual timer a lot because I have issues with time, and I'm always the one running late. And so something at an early age with students, and this is usually a lot of people use this with students who have autism, but it's used, most of our teachers now just all have them in the classroom because they can see and break down increments of
So
time.
that actually works?
Oh yeah,
I
it's going to
seriously
go
thought that
off.
was a toy.
It's no, it's not a toy.
That's
It goes off, and so
I love that.
So
I
we
want
have
one.
students, like even I'll tell them, there's little mini ones too, and I've given them to students who have time issues, and I'll say, okay, let's make your time schedule. When are you going to do homework? How much time are you going to spend on social media? What is your bedtime? What is your awake time? How much time do you need to get to school? I have students who have missed, I can't even tell you, 60 days of school, tardy, and so executive functioning, keeping those routines, and helping them with in high school. It doesn't stop there.
I think some of that, of what you're saying, actually, not to blame you guys at all, but I noticed from my perspective, being in a preschool, early learning, early elementary, the kids don't have control of getting to school on time, and it's the parents. I'm sorry. So sometimes it's good to be a positive role model in that regard, and being on time with appointments, and just making it an effort to be on time for them. It actually, they don't like walking into class late. They don't. They feel everybody's looking at them. It's just, they shut down. What it does to the brain, I'm sure Stacy can talk to you about that.
Yes.
But they have this anxiety when they walk in late, even at 3, 4, or 5. So it's really important, starting with parents, to model that as well.
I just want to jump back real quick. How do we get one of these?
I know I want one.
I think Lisa put out a book list, right?
Yeah, no, the clock.
Oh, the
I
timer.
wanna know
I
where you got that.
actually, on my book list, I set some links. I'm not sure what the book list actually looks like,
I didn't see
but I have some links. There's a great website. It's called, I can see someone holding it.
Oh, nice.
It's called Therapy Shop. It's an online shop, and so pretty much everything I have here comes from Therapy Shop or Walmart, but you can get a visual timer there.
Yeah, so on routines, I just wanted to touch base also with like some of the things that we use. At the school that I teach here, Suncoast Academy, we are a responsive classroom school, so there's certain things that we do that really tie into social and emotional well-being, and doing a lot of structure is part of that as well. So one of the things that I do, even with my own children at home, is if we're having a problem getting out the door, or if I feel like I have to micromanage every little thing in the morning to get them to do something, then I sit down with them. Now, this isn't in my ideal world what I do. Sometimes this happens, sometimes not so much. I'll sit down with them with actually a piece of paper and say, okay, we're going to brainstorm together. And one of the techniques, and actually on my book list, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk, is a book. And they talk about the act of writing down things that your kids suggest is actually really beneficial for them, because they feel validated, even if it's the most ridiculous thing, like, I'm not going to go to school on Thursdays, and you're like, okay. And, but at the end of that, like, you can go back through and be like, well, that's not an option because school's important and you have to go on Thursdays, so you can mark it off. But the act of writing it down for them, it shows validation that their ideas are important, and it helps them be more open with you, even so that they don't feel like things are silly and you're not going to recognize their ideas. So with my kids, a lot of times I'll sit and be like, okay, we're having an issue getting out the door. What are the things we're going to do? And I help them kind of make lists of what they're going to do. And so instead of me being like, have you brushed your teeth? Did you eat your breakfast? Have you put your shoes on? Have you gotten your backpack? Do you have your homework? We write it down for each of them, and then I say, did you check your list? So I'm a little further removed from the steps. I've kind of given them a little more ownership. And again, that's kind of setting the table for the executive functions as they grow. We want them to be responsible adults. So we don't want to have to carry their backpacks for them forever. We want to teach them to advocate for themselves and to be organized for themselves. So by providing that from early childhood up, we really give them an opportunity to develop that part of their brain that helps organize and keep them responsible.
And if you get this book, there's actually a section that goes through, and it starts and it tells you at each particular age, going from preschool, kindergarten, grade 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and high school, developmentally what is appropriate for that age, and helping. I had some notes for myself. I'm a much better teacher probably than I was a parent. First of all, because it wasn't so emotional. I was like, get in the car, I'm gonna be late, and throwing things in, and I was one of those. But as a teacher, not to say I'm not vested emotionally, I just can detach a little more. So and I've changed over the course of time. I used to be like, we're going to do this, and you're going to come in here at lunch, and we're going to organize your binders, and you're going to come here after school, and I'm going to go through and make sure you get all your homework out. And now I'll say, what is your plan, and how can I help you with that plan? And it really has changed the way that students have responded. They don't feel like I'm dictating to them. As a parent, I probably did that a lot more. Well, you need to do this, 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 and this. And, they didn't have, back in the days when I was raising my children, all these brain-based stuff quite as much. So.
Speaking of, actually, when you said that, the like freak out parent moment that I know if you're in here, you've probably experienced, because we all have. I was just reading recently, and one of the books on the book list is No Drama Discipline. And so they actually talk about how a story of a mom who was going to school, and she was trying to take her kids, and so the dad was going to take the one daughter, and she was going to take the other daughter. And when she said the plan as they're walking to the car, the younger daughter just completely freaked out and said, no, I rode with dad yesterday. Today's my day to ride with you. And, she was just losing like her self-control over it. And the mom, instantly is like, well, it doesn't make sense. Dad's going that direction. That's who you're right. Whichever one it was, there was a reason. And they really go into, at that age and that phase, when a kid gets into that state of being frustrated, that they're not able to use their higher level thinking. They're not able to let into that prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain that actually can have logic and reasoning. They've shut that down, and they're just in this reactive mode. So to sit down with a kid who's in that state and try to explain to them, well, it makes sense that dad is the one taking you because it's on his way, they are not able to take that in. So one of the things they suggest even in this reading is that, you help name and tame what they're experiencing. So like, Autumn, you want to elaborate a little bit on that, because you've read up on that as well, right?
Yeah, so I think, like you said, validating their emotions and validating what they're feeling is super important. I mean, even at such a little child level, all the way up, I taught 5th grade, 6th grade, but just speaking to the littler ones as well, they really need to feel validated. So, for example, if a child is throwing a fit and they take their plate and just throw it on the floor and, just validating their feelings. I see that you're very upset.
So that's how we normally respond as parents, right? If your kid throws their plate on the floor, I'm like,
I can see.
It's true, though. In the meantime, you want to pick up the other plate and just throw it out. But we have to maintain composure. But just validating their feelings and saying, I understand what, for example, I'll give you an example. When at the school that I was working at for 8 years, they got sent to the principal's office. That was me. So by the time they got to my office, they had a little bit of time to cool down, but I get down on their level and, eye level, so they can see me and I can see them, and they can feel that I'm going to listen. I can see you're very upset. What happened? So they instantly, you're gonna hear me. You're gonna listen. This is great. And then they'll speak and say, well, I bit Johnny because he took the ball from me. This is true. This actually happened quite often. So, okay, I can see why that would really upset you. If somebody took something from me, I'd be very, very upset too. I understand. That must really make you feel frustrated. Yes. Okay. So what could we do differently? Did biting him give you the ball back? Maybe. How would you feel if Johnny bit you? And then we get into that. So I usually try to keep it simple and in their terms and at their level, but just really validating their feelings. I went off on a tangent, sorry.
No,
but just validating their feelings and saying, they need to emote. They have to have emotions. We're people. It's very important, and they don't understand why they're frustrated or how else to speak it. We learn. We have those little connectors that we learn, and so it's really important for us to just, okay, I understand, and not have the expectation that they're adults and that they can just, well, so as a 2-year-old, well, he did this and I did that, and that this is why I did this.
No, I mean, they do things that make no sense. It makes no sense.
None.
But in the state they're in, they're not like, The Whole Brain Child is another book on the book read list that's really good about this. But it talks a lot about how kids developing their upstairs brain, which again is that prefrontal cortex where we actually have logic and reasoning, compared to our reptilian brain, which is like the downstairs brain, which is much more reactive when we're in like fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so kids are developing how to get from kind of that lower reaction to that higher level of thinking. But they're not always good at it, and things trigger to where that door is closed, they're not able to get upstairs, they're only in downstairs. And you can yell at them till you're blue in the face, but it is going to do no good until you've figured out a way to calm them enough to get that door back open to where you can have those kinds of conversations. So,
And you, as a parent, are probably also in that caveman back part when you're feeling that way. And that's one of the things that if you can, and like I said, I'm a much better teacher than I was a parent because the emotional component as a parent, and then high school, they can express exactly how they feel. And sometimes I'm looking at a 19-year-old man who's telling me he's bleep, 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 bleep. And so having them be able to do some heavy work and some sensory stuff. A lot of people take out their frustrations at the gym or have a creative outlet. And so my classroom actually looks like a gym. I have a trampoline, I have a bike, I have all kinds of different things. And so sometimes even like a little punching bag, doing martial arts, and having some of these other outlets evolving from being able to express themselves as they get older, learning how to appropriately have an outlet and knowing that it's okay to be frustrated. There's nothing wrong with having emotion, but there's appropriate ways to express that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to kind of piggyback on that and talk a little bit about sensory things, but I'm going to hit just an example of my own child a little bit. He's not in here, so I can do that. My youngest, from a young age, about 2 years old, I could tell that he was not developing language in the same way that my other two had. And so I thought he wasn't hearing, so I kept going to the pediatrician and saying, he's not hearing me, something's wrong, something's not developing correctly. And of course, if you've ever tried to get something out of your pediatrician that's like barely developmentally off, they're not super keen on usually giving you much. So I fought that battle for a couple years until finally I had him in preschool for the first time, and the preschool teacher did an evaluation on him and told me, yeah, he's very below in every area as far as fine motor skills, language development, auditory, everything, which I already knew, but it was kind of the first time someone else had said it. And I was able to take that and go get an evaluation done. I became like mama bear, like crazy. Like they're like, oh, you're gonna have to wait 6 months for this appointment. I was like, I will not. I will call someone else and I will have it tomorrow. Like I am done with that. And so I ended up getting him an evaluation. And he was really struggling even with things like, and I'm a teacher. I was like, this is the letter A. What letter is it? No idea. Next day, this is the letter A. What letter is it? No idea. And after like a month of this, I'm like, something is not connecting for him. And he was smart and social in so many other ways. Like he was very normal in a lot of ways. He just had these weird things that he could not intake with language. And so when I took him to be evaluated, they told me he had a language impairment. And also that he had some major reflex integration difficulties. So basically what that means is his body was not integrated the way that it should be. So for instance, if you were to tell him at 4 to draw a T on a piece of paper, he would literally draw the line down the middle, draw one side of the line and the other side of the T, which I didn't know that he did that until he was evaluated. So I brought him over to my parents' house, who's the pastor of the church here, and my mom's in the back there. And I told my dad, I was like, this is a thing, like he doesn't cross a T. My dad's like, that's not a real thing. I'm like, watch him. And he made him do it like 15 times, like line, 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 line. I'm like, he won't cross the midline. And so this is a thing in your brain where he didn't integrate these reflexes as an infant. Naturally, we just we're born with these like reflexes in our body, and you integrate them as you get older. And he did not. He didn't, for whatever reason. We don't have a real reason of that. 2 out of 3 did, but the last one did not for my family. I don't know why. So he had these crazy challenges with his body. So they're like, he doesn't cross the middle of his body. So he would, if he needed to pick something up, he would turn to his body like this and pick it up with this hand. Or if he needed to turn the other, he would turn his body and pick it up with this hand. He would never reach across. So part of the therapy and things that we did was integrating those reflexes by by reaching across and doing activities, physical movements that integrated these things. And within 3 or 4 months, he had learned all the letters and all the sounds. Like, I mean, his language development just skyrocketed. And it was because his body was very disconnected. So I want on that note to kind of explain how sensory things, so he also has it also ties into sensory. So for instance, his body gets what I call dysregulated, which is where he kind of is out of control. He's more in that fight flight mode all of a sudden, and he needs certain things in his body to calm him down and bring him back into regulation to be able to learn and to focus. Almost all of us may not have that level of it, but we all have things that bother us sensory-wise. So we're going to talk a little bit about how this affects every kid and what you can do at home and at school to kind of help regulate your kids in order to be able to help them with their sensory differences that we have. So April's an expert on some of this, so she's going to
And I'm going to plug another book, the Sensory Team Handbook. And like she said, just think about if you have a certain food that perhaps I cannot eat scallops. The texture, just, I cannot eat them. They taste, I eat every other seafood. T-shirts. I have a son that the tags could not be in. Thank God they have the V-neck, J. Crew, soft cotton now. But back in the day, sock lines. Some of you know, you have your comfy jeans or whatever. So sensory, it can be extreme, or it can be less extreme. But if your body, your brain and your sensory are all integrated into one, and they like to separate them. And so if you are out of sync, you cannot learn. So there's the senses, you know, your 5 senses, but there are 2 other senses. They are your vestibular, which is, it bases in your inner ear, and it's your balance. And so there are some kids that have issues with that, and it does also go into some of the crossing the midline. You have this imaginary line in the middle of your body, and you have a right side of your brain and your left side of the brain. And we talk about the front and the back doing some things together. Well, the left and right, in order to be able to read as well as comprehend, to get the picture in your head of the story, or to hear the soundtrack or whatever, you have to be integrating. And if you don't do that, you can't. So one of the things you can do, there's another excellent book, and there's activities in here. It's called Brain Gym, and that's on my list as well. I'm sitting on something right now that regulates and integrates my midline. Some people would hate this. This keeps me focused more. You have 2 sides. Some people, they come to my desk at school and someone will go, oh gosh, she's got her cushion, they have to move it. But by doing this, I'm balancing and I'm integrating. If you've ever done Pilates at all, you pull into your midline. So that's one thing that you can do. There are actually chairs. Rocking chairs is another thing that can help you with integration. It's great for kids with ADD, ADHD. They get to move. This is called a wobble chair. My kids get going. I'm tutoring, and they're like doing this. They've got sand going, and they're reading. And while they're doing all this, they're activating and integrating. There's a whole network of pathways that are being put together. This is a balance board, and I probably shouldn't do it because I have vestibular issues. If you're the klutz and you're not very coordinated, that would be your sensory issue. That's me. But you actually, this is a balance board. And so kids can do this. See, I can't do it. This is my challenge. And kids can balance, and you all are welcome to try this on your own. And by doing just some little exercises before going to school, or if you have a classroom that integrates this stuff, kids, the learning gains will happen. What else did I bring here? The other one is called
Proprioceptive.
Yes.
I'm tracking.
Huh?
I'm tracking with you.
Yes, yes. And this one has to do with your muscles and your joints. And so some kids and all of these, you can have overstimulation and understimulation, but there are some weighted belts that kids can wear. Some kids just they might take a jacket and they zip it up real close. They like that pressure. Compression shirts. They need weight. They need to feel grounded. If they don't, they kind of feel disjointed to their body, and so then the learning doesn't happen. So what was the other one besides, let's see, they can do weight it, they can do
Well, I know, like,
squeeze machines.
Right,
but-
yes, that's what I was going to go with is,
Yeah.
I know for my son, sometimes before he would go to bed, he would struggle because he'd be like all worked up and kind of in his body would be out of sync. And so one of the things we would do before he would go to bed to settle him down was to, he would lay down and we'd put a pillow on him and literally like squish his body up and down. And you could just watch him go like into it because he needed that input of proprioceptive input, that sense, in order to calm himself. Another thing sometimes when he would dysregulate that helped with that, sometimes he'd be like freaking out in his like, flight mode with me. And I would literally put him in like a hot shower and the water pressure on his body would calm him down.
And that's some of in the
So-
sensory handbook. They will have you take little questionnaires and little quizzes, and you can do it as a family. Everyone has sensory
Yes.
issues, and it gives you practical things that you can do. Like swimming is actually a pressure activity because of the water pressure. I have kids that'll come in and they'll high schoolers, and they'll have their backpack on, and they weigh like 1,000,000 pounds, and they'll sit there and they're taking their test. And I was like, don't you want to take your backpack off? They're like, no, it helps me think. So your body actually knows a lot of what it needs, and oftentimes they will seek out. I asked Miss Cupo if I could share. Her son used to come into my room, and he was taking his FSA test, and he's sitting I have a picture of it. He's sitting in a rocking chair, and he's got kinetic sand, and some other things that that have sold really well, the sequence things that everyone is doing now, and kinetic sand. He's sitting there, he's got his hands pumping, he's doing kinetic sand, he's rocking. I think he was in a rocking chair. We also have these bands that you can put on for pressure. You can put them on a chair, or you can put them around your legs and
Right.
stretch and stuff. He was like going at it, and they walk in, they're like, what's he doing? He had no idea he was even in the room taking it. I'm like, oh, he's taking his FSA, his FCAT, his practice test. And he was just going. And the older they get, they do learn. And if you teach your children about this is what you need, this is what I can see, like by the time Brady gets old enough, he'll know what he needs to do. It's a little harder on the young age.
It
Yeah,
is.
you
It's
have
a
to
lot
keep
of
track.
trial and error. It's a lot
Absolutely.
of reading them. But even like I have a couple of my colleagues here tonight who have the alternate seating, even for their reading groups at their tables, they sit on these stools because again, some kids are very dysregulated regularly, like they have more of a disorder with it, but we all have sensory things. I mean, think about the things that bother you. When something beeps repetitively, I lose my mind. I cannot handle that. The scallop thing, we all have the things that we're doing. And really with sensory stuff, a lot of times our bodies are filtering all day. The job of our body, according to my OT friend, is to filter a lot of what we feel and what we hear and what we see. We're only really taking in small portions of what we're experiencing in our sensory. And so what happens is a kid that's dysregulated, a lot of times they are overwhelmed with stuff they're not filtering. So they're hearing the air conditioner, and they're seeing the glare of the lights, and they're feeling, the blow of the wind on their skin, and they're feeling the tag on their back, and their socks aren't right, and there's not enough pressure, their shoes aren't tied tight enough. And they are sitting in a classroom, and they're unable to learn because all of those things are happening in their body, and they cannot filter those out to focus. So even when you're at home with your kids, noticing, we have exercise balls in my house. If you've ever been to my house, I have 4 or 5 exercise, those big ones that just float around the house all day. And my kids love them. They sit on them all the time. They bounce around on them, and they're tacky, but we utilize them, so they're okay.
Some that would drive me crazy because that's too much stimulation for me. I get very easily overwhelmed. So if they were all bouncing on them, I couldn't handle it. So there are some that actually sit in a frame, and so they can bounce, and it's a little more controlled
It's a
chaos.
little more controlled. Okay, I remember where I was going. Part of what I do with my students is, I'll give them a fidget thing, which actually that'll lead into some of your fidget stuff. Different things in class, and I'll do a lesson with them, and then at the end I say, this is more like elementary, mid-elementary, like 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. We put them down, and then we talk about how it felt to have it in our hand. Did it help you focus? Were you distracted by it? Were you thinking about it? Were you what was it doing in your head while you're doing it? Because that self-analysis allows them even to know, what they need in order to be the most regulated and the most turned on in their brain to learn. So identifying with your kids even at home as you start seeing things that, like I know a little girl that really loves to smell things, and it really regulates her to take a sniff of something. And so she will sometimes get upset and worked up, and she smells her blanket, which has this whatever scent it is now, and it will calm her down, and she's good. And so just things like that as you learn your kids' quirks. Again, we all have these quirks. It's just a matter of kind of figuring out how your child responds to it, what works for them, and it kind of changes sometimes. So you might figure out what we call like a sensory diet that's working currently, and then 6 months later, it may not be effective anymore. So it's kind of a fluid thing as well. Anything you guys want to add to sensory stuff? Autumn, did you have any input on that?
No, you guys covered it.
Yeah, and I have gadgets, and I mean, you would think high schoolers maybe wouldn't want them, but just, like I said, therapy shop, or you can just go to the dollar store. But think about things that are soothing, going to the ocean and listening to the sound, or watching the waves, or feeling that. And so you kind of try to create that in a stressful situation. I have kids that will be in the middle of testing, and they'll come and take a 5-minute brain break, and just like bubblers, I mean, they're mesmerizing how many you're drawn to them. Someone who needs weight, you can also, I taught at the military academy, so we had some structure, and they needed to be structured. There are little fidgets that you can put on that, twirling a ring, or the fidget spinners are the most distracting thing in the world. And I'd say, if you are distracting me, you're distracting yourself. It's not helping you. But there are things that you can get, just all kinds of little fidgets, timer, little bubblers. These are little things they can keep in their pocket. They're marbles.
Those are the ones I use.
There's also some water-filled ones that squish and glitter, and it's so funny. I have a shelf with everything on it, and they'll come in and they'll get what they want. I have kids who wear headphones because they can't stand hearing noise. The air conditioner will bother some. And I can't listen to music while I'm doing work, but some, they're like, can I put my headphones on and listen to music? So all of that is sensory stuff.
Mm-hmm. So with your sensory toys, you go from where to get to that point. You know what I mean? So like, how would they know, okay, my kid needs this, or...
This book is foolproof, but it just takes you through, and it says, answer these questions. If you answer this could be some things that help you. And they give you things like this, but they also give you activities. And most, like I said, your body knows. If your child starts doing martial, like a lot of people say, oh, we're going to do Taekwondo, or we're going to do this, it helps with focus and stuff. For some, that truly is beneficial, and some, it's another cause for anxiety, or it's just not in them. So go through, it gives practical rock climbing or biking, or kayaking is very good for balancing, jumping rope, all different things. It gives you just daily things that you can do. And once their body is kind of tamed and centered, then you can actually, hopefully the learning will take place.
Yeah, they say that even in the neuroscience behind a lot of this is that the more integrated they become by being aware of these things and by using these tools, you're creating neural pathways where you want them when you have them in that place. So actually, I'm going to segue real quick because they wanted me to just mention a little bit about, I'm going to throw out some big neuro terms for you that they told me I wasn't allowed to use. But one of the big studies right now of the brain is called neuroplasticity. And that's a big word, but basically it means that your brain is kind of like plastic, which means that we can manipulate it and change the way that we think and the way that we respond to things. It's very changeable. So this is applicable with kids, even as teachers, but even in my own house, I've been practicing a few things. Now, again, if you've met my kids, you know that I'm not perfect at this, certainly not. But, you know, my daughter has an issue right now where she leaves drawers open. It's just awful.
That
It's
would
awful.
stress me out.
Drawers, everywhere you go,
Okay,
drawers
we
open.
found what mine is.
She's almost 10. It's ridiculous. And so with the concept of neuroplasticity is basically that I want to reiterate the pathway I want. So for example, let me give an illustration real quick. So in the brain, you have these pathways from A to B. You can rewire to go, instead of from A to B, you can go to A to C. But you have to train your brain first to go to A to C. And they say in neuroscience that the neurons that fire together wire together. So you're really focusing on trying to wire two things together. So the example they give in, I believe it's this book, The Yes Brain, is that your brain is almost like a snowy hill. And you get to the top of that hill, and you get on your sled, and whenever something happens, so let's say something causes you anxiety. You go up the hill, you have anxiety, you get on your sled, and you go down the rut you've always been in, which is to panic, okay? And you get to Panicville over there. And they say that if you go up to the top of the hill and you decide in that moment that you're not going to get on the sled and ride that pathway, you're going to choose instead that you're going to take deep breaths, you're going to take a walk, you're going to regulate in a different way. You choose a different path in your brain to create. And what happens is you get back to that hill, and now you have two pathways the next time it comes. So you have the pathway that you've just started. It doesn't have a very deep rut. The other one still has the really deep rut. It's where your brain wants to go. It wants to go back to Panicville. That's where you've always gone. But you can choose again to make a new rut and to go down to the calm and peaceful place you want to be. And the more that you connect to that secondary slope, that secondary rut, the snow kind of starts covering the other tracks, and you create the pathway that you want in your brain. So for example, if Peyton was working on her multiplication facts the other day, and she was doing 6 times 7, and I'm like, what's 6 times 7? She's like, I don't know. And I looked at her, and I was like, and I wanted her to figure it out or to guess. And then I thought about I don't want her to connect in her brain. 6 times 7 is whatever she comes up with, 57 or something. I want that pathway to be 6 times 7 equals 42. So I told her, I said, 6 times 7 is 42. And I said, now repeat it back to me. 6 times 7 is 42. Okay, what's 6 times 7? 42. So I am intentionally creating a pathway from 6 times 7 to 42. I'm wiring those neurons together by having her repeat to me, by giving her the answer I want, by having her say it back to me. So our thing with the drawers now is every time she sees an open drawer, she has to say, we close drawers, and close the drawer. So I hear her all through the house, we close drawers. So I want the neurons to fire when she sees the open drawer to hear a voice in her head going, we close drawers, and she closes them. So we're working on it. We're getting better. It's been a little better. I'm not running into drawers every 10 seconds right now, so we're working on that. But that neuroplasticity concept works in a lot of different ways. I gave a little mini lesson of that to my staff at school recently, and it was really good feedback. Even with a kid that's working on a sight word, and let's say you're working on their homework, and they have the word what, and every time they get to the word what, they say where. Every time you let them make that error at that point, you are reiterating a pathway that you don't want. So you need to correct them on the back end. When they see the word, you say, this word is what? Tell me what word it is. What? This word is what? And then you're intentionally building the pathway you want for them. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't a time for problem solving or fixing or editing or those kinds of things. There is. There's still a place for that. It's just when you have a rut that's going to the wrong place, you want to be able to correct that. And you have the power to create these neurons that fire together by being intentional with those matchings. So it's a really cool thing with the Yes Brain talks a lot about that, about kind of that neuroplasticity concept and how it works for parenting and how it works in education and all kinds of things. So if you're interested in that, it's a really fun concept. I just rambled about that for a long time. Sorry.
Yeah.
Anything you guys want to, we're almost out of our time. We're going to do Q&A. Do you have anything you want to add before we get there? How's our red timer here?
It should be going soon.
Let's see.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. There's a big giant
What
timer on the
happens?
back wall.
Can't wait.
Oh.
Yeah,
Does
what
it make a noise?
Are you excited? What does
No,
it
it
do?
just beeps.
I'm like
It's
so
like
excited
Pablo.
about this.
Some exercises you can do as well. Brain gym. You would never go run a marathon or go to work out without stretching and things. So some of the things that they do in brain gym actually helps you to get your brain ready to learn. So crossing the midline was one that she talked about, and there's something called cross crawl, and you can do it where I see someone doing one, yes. You can do this. You can actually Google anything, YouTube, whatever. It'll tell you all kinds of brain gym activities to do. But even having students where they take and so they're not disrupting or whatever, it's touching alternate You can do it sitting, you can do it standing. Believe it or not, that actually helps them cross the midline.
We do
This
elbow
one-
to knee to.
Huh?
We do elbow to
elbow
knee.
to
so
knee,
They like, yeah.
and they do this one too as well. I'm wear my flat shoes so I don't fall. Yep. And then they do. There's another one. It's called lazy eights. So you think of a sideways 8 right here, and you follow your thumb, and this helps with tracking. One of the big issues a lot of students have is, especially younger, they'll lose their place when they're reading. But if you take and you make an 8 and you follow it, and you're at the same time you're crossing your midline, and they can do lazy 8s. You can do mirroring if you want to help integrate both sides of your brain. You can do this on paper, on a dry erase board, or just in the air. So you could say, oh, we're going to draw. I'm going to do a mirror. I'm drawing. And doing it, it's doodling. Doing it on paper is really cool. The kids enjoy that, doing, like, trying to do a house and doing symmetrical shapes, and that integrates both of them as well. Just doing some simple things like that before learning, before doing homework, will help them, and it kind of makes it a little bit fun.
It does. I know when I taught 5th grade, yes, 5th grade, I had the kids every time before they had a test, a major test, they get test anxiety. We were just talking about this, and I put on music, and we had a dance party right before the test, and just to, that's it.
There it is.
Wow,
I've been waiting
kind of
for that.
anticlimactic.
That was a little.
So Susan is reminding me that the number is on the screen, and we would like for you guys to text in questions at this point so that we can try to answer anything that you have.
I just have one so far, and that is, how do you know when you need professional intervention about your child's sensory issues?
I'm going to need that microphone back. So you want me to share, or you want to, TJ, you want this to fix it? Okay. Meh. Lost a few hairs, that's all right. All right, read it again for me.
Just how do you know when your child needs professional intervention for their sensory issues?
It's a good question.
Since we all have them.
Sensory is a tricky thing too, because there is no actual diagnosis code for medical for a sensory disorder. You have to have something else. And in the school system, it actually follows suit to where it's considered a secondary disability. So it's not able to be treated as a primary, which means you cannot get services with an occupational therapist, which is what your service would want to be, unless you have something else going on. So
Typically, they will go hand in hand.
yes, usually the OT is related to something.
Language issue, or you would.
Thank you. Thank you. Look at this. Look at that service.
Typically, you'll hear from the teacher, and like there's an academic issue, or there's a behavior issue, or there's some sort of disruptive issue going on. So I think that's where it
Yeah, definitely
would likely start.
questioning with your teacher is a good start. You know, you can take them for a private evaluation whenever you want to. Sometimes insurance will cover that with certain places. That's what I ended up having to do with my son, was go private evaluations, and then I used those evaluations to receive services in the school system. But first I had to do it kind of myself, because the process in the school system is slow. It is not quick, and it's not easy. Unfortunately, I mean, we work in this system, so we know, like, it's flawed.
We're quick to tell you that your child needs help.
But we don't always have all the
we don't-
solutions for that.
Just
in the
say wait
school
in line.
system.
6 months later, we'll help you out.
I mean, that's, you know, we do the best we can in the box that we're in, but you definitely, I would say, if it's disrupting your life, that it's definitely time to get some sensory help. But like I said, in the school system, if you don't have something else like an attention deficit, or a language impairment, or a learning disability, or something with some kind of diagnosis, or learning problems on top of it, they won't even provide occupational
But I've
therapy.
found that a lot of times, especially at the younger age, educators tend to say, oh, this child has ADD, when really it could potentially be a sensory issue.
Right.
It's not that they're not able to focus, it's that their sock is so tight around their
Right.
toe right now that's all they can really think about. And it's not, and you know, maybe they're tapping a lot, or it could be a sensory thing and not necessarily ADD or ADHD. So
And on that
Pay
note,
attention.
noticing with your own children, you know, and with my youngest, this was something I had to learn, and his dad had to learn as well. Like, he needs his shoes to be tight, so, you know, we have to make sure his shoes are tight. He only has a certain pair of style of shorts right now that he will wear. And if he doesn't have clean shorts of those style, then he pretty much will, like, the day will be completely wasted at school because all he'll think about all day is the fact that his shorts are not right. So learning to let some of those little things go. I have literally sent him in dirty shorts to school just a couple weeks ago and told his teacher, like, so it was either distraction all day by clean shorts or he wore the dirty shorts. And she was like, dirty shorts it is. I'm like, I agree. So just kind of learning to let some of those pieces go. If your kid is really bucking you on a certain thing that they're wearing, an item of clothing or something they're doing, try to pay attention. That may be a signal to you that forcing them into that may put them into a mindset all day of being distracted and being obsessed with whatever it is that's bothering them. So kind of pay attention to tags, anything they're bringing to your attention. You know, it's easy to dismiss that, but, you know, we all know the things that bother us, you know, the things that we wear that we don't want to wear again because we didn't like the way it feels or whatever. As adults, we all have things like that. So paying attention to the way that your kids respond to that. I mean, I have put Brady into things and regretted it because at the end of the fight with him, I realized, like, he's not being defiant, he's uncomfortable, which is a learning lesson as a mother. So kind of pay attention to those signals.
Okay, panel. What strategies do you have to calm my child down when it's a full-blown chaotic meltdown and the validating their feelings is just not working?
you have to. Can I start on that one?
Yeah, go for it, please.
I see a lot of that one. It depends on what the trigger was, but typically what I find is that I will just say, I can see that you're very upset. I'm going to walk away. When you're ready to talk about it,
Yeah.
come find me.
Yeah, definitely
And
the
I will
take a
be
break
happy to give
option.
you a hug. I will be happy to, when you're ready, I'll be over here. And usually it takes less than a minute, maybe two, depending on the age. Stubborn kids, maybe a little longer. But typically that's it. And then, okay, now we talk about it. Let them get through it, step away, go away, don't watch it, because if they have an audience, they'll do it for a long time. So just stepping away from the situation is good.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. However, when it's in the middle of the grocery store, sometimes that's not
Oh, no, you walk away.
necessarily an option.
It's not mine.
So there are. I don't know who
Whose
that
kid is that?
So ideally, yeah, taking a break, allowing them to be able to kind of connect back into their upstairs brain, name it and tame it. Sometimes even coming next to them and hugging them. I mean, which is like, when my kids are freaking out, like the last thing I feel like doing is coming
Yeah,
over and hugging
they don't.
you, like you're driving me crazy. But just that like reminder of like, I'm here, we're calm, we're okay. Now let's figure out how to do it. Because again, I want to reason with my kids, like, what in the world are you thinking? Why would you, like, what is in your head to make you want to talk like that or to do that or whatever? And they are not ready for that conversation. So I have had to learn that I am talking to a complete stone wall until I've pulled them into a place where their upstairs brain is back engaged. So again, hugging, kind of giving them that proprio on their bodies, that tight squeeze, that proprioceptive input is really important. A shower, again, shower is my best friend with mine. Like I have literally taken him crying and screaming into a shower and put him in there. And he literally goes like this, like just calms down. So kind of finding some of those things that work for your kid, but escalating, you're almost putting them more into fight and flight mode by escalating with them. They're going further and further into their reactive brain, and they're not engaged with you logically at that point at all. So really the best way to bring them out of it is by calming them down with taking a break, giving them a hug, speaking about what they're feeling, giving them words and verbiage. Actually, on brain scans shows that when a kid is escalated into an kind of that reactive state, that just by telling them, I can see how angry you are, that their brain starts releasing and their amygdala, which is like the little gatekeeper, starts opening back up. So yeah, even neurologically, there's something to that.
But when it's a full blown out, I hate the world. I'm screaming.
You mean every other day?
They need, they do need that moment. They need that moment
Yeah,
to
the
just,
space.
because they're not going to hear anything you have to say
Yeah.
at all.
Anything to add to that, April?
No, I'm glad I'm not in raising little kids anymore.
Okay. How do you think that schools could implement more practices that develop the prefrontal cortex?
I love the use of prefrontal cortex.
Prefrontal cortex.
I think that a lot of schools do. I think that most, it's been just the frontier has opened. Like I said, when I was raising my children, we were on the cusp of just starting out, and now the brain-based stuff that they know and teachers are aware of, and your classroom doesn't look like, well, there are still a few rows and a lectern up front. They're engaging, and they give the actually most responsive classrooms, and most children have to learn on their own. They own their learning.
Yeah,
they
it's
are
very-
part of the plan.
It's very engaging, hands-on. There's a big movement right now in education for the last few years called PBLs, project-based learning. So that is a lot of, being hands-on, researching things themselves, even at a young age, putting things together in the way that they can understand it and present it back. So, I mean, all of those things are using that prefrontal cortex, those higher-level thinking questions and stuff.
I think that it's also not horrible I would be very receptive to this if, as an educator, if you came up with some things and said, hey, I found that these work really well with my child at home. Read through some of those books that we have on our list, and these are just a few strategies. Maybe it'd help with your whole class to just get them centered and focused, and offer that to them. Why not?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know communicating with parents for my students, if the parent comes to me and says, this is something we've learned that works for them at home, even if I can't necessarily utilize that exact thing, understanding what it is that's working for them really helps kind of bring some enlightenment without me doing all the trial and error on the back end. So by providing things for your educators, again, hopefully most educators are pretty open, especially if you go into it with not I know better than you, because no educator really loves that, but more
But they do know their child better
this is
than
something
us.
that helps my kid.
Yeah.
So it might be beneficial for you to understand that. And I think that most educators are fairly
I feel
open to that.
they value the partnership that we're working on it together.
Yes, I agree.
Because sometimes, especially by high school, they drop them off at the door, and we never see the parents for 4 years. But I think that they're very receptive and open to trying new things and things that work.
And hopefully in your school system that they are moving forward with new understanding of brain-based learning. I mean, brain-based learning is such a big push right now. I mean, the amount of scanning and things that we have to understand the mind and how things are firing neurologically, it has a huge impact for learning, and I'm hopeful that even in the next 10 years, we'll see a shift of that to where education is more tied to neuroscience than it even is now. I would love to be on the frontier of that. We'll see.
Can sensory issues be similar to OCD?
Sometimes. Yeah. Yeah.
And it goes back to that learned pattern you're talking about, and that's the hardest thing with OCD is that you are building those neurons that I do this, I do this, I do this, and you have to break that pattern. But it can be very much taking control of your sensory, that you need to have control of whatever. It could be, the clothing that you need to have a certain way, to look a certain way, and things in a certain place, or the washing of the hands. I have a lot of students on my caseload that are high functioning on the spectrum, and they do have OCD tendencies, and it will be because it is a sensory thing. They need the water, they need to feel the temperature, it grounds them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very integrated, and ADHD is as well, very much on that as far as, again, we're saying sometimes they say there's focus issues, but what you realize is that they're not filtering the sensory stimuli that they're receiving. They're not able to focus on the work they're doing because their shoe is bothering them. So they're very intertwined. It is hard, even as a professional sometimes, to pull those apart, and sometimes there's a little bit of each. The patterns flow together. And so a lot of the treatment options, though, understanding the neurology behind it, understanding how to kind of calm and bring them into a state of receptive function, I mean, all those things work across the board for any of those. Some of the things work no matter what those diagnoses are.
And having that conversation with the children from a young age, we all have strengths and we have weaknesses, and this is how, and we all learn differently. It empowers them. I have students, I'm like, I try to have them become their own self-advocates. They'll go in and say, I need this, or they've learned to verbalize that. And I have a student that came in, he was testing with me a couple weeks ago, and I could tell he had not taken his medication. And
How
he,
can you tell?
and I don't know that feeling except if I have had like an espresso shot or something, but I said to him, I said, oh, you didn't take your medication today? And he said, no. He says, my therapist tells me, and I'm just so delighted to hear this, because so many kids tell me, I'm disruptive, I didn't do my homework, I can't learn, I can't focus because I'm ADHD, I have a learning disability. They use it as a crutch or they use it as an excuse. And this student said, the medication is a tool, the things that you've taught me is a tool, but ultimately I'm responsible for my own behavior. And there's no excuse for me to be disruptive to someone else. And he would say, he goes, I think I'm gonna go take a walk. And I was like, please do. But yeah.
That brings up the next question. How do you feel about medication for ADD as opposed to behavior modification, or do you think they need to be used together?
I'm not sure I want to touch
I'm a
that one.
fan. No, I'm just
No, I definitely think there's a lot of alternate
there,
treatments.
There are
but-
alternate treatments, but sometimes I've seen extremely severe cases where, one in particular, where this child, when it wore off, like she was sent to my office, I gave her the dose midday. She took it in the morning, midday, and then right before the 3 o'clock dismissal, I realized we needed to give it to her 12:30 and not 12, because she suddenly just she would dart into the street it was actually dangerous. So there are some extreme cases where it's really, really necessary.
I think there are lots of alternatives, and you should investigate, start with
Yeah.
diet and sensory integration and all the different tools that they have. But if you're not successful, I have seen students literally handwriting has changed, personalities have changed. I had it when like I said, working in the older, with the older age group, they will tell me, one of the students said, Captain Tisdale, there's a party going on in my head when I am, don't take my medication. And so, but doing other things, alternative, breathing and yoga and exercise, but ultimately that may need to be something along the way. And that's something you would do as a family and with that, child and your physician and everything.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Being in the classroom and in the trenches, you see the difference that a kid who needs medicine in order to function. And again, this is the society we're in. This is the educational system we're in. It may not be ideal, but they function within those bounds when they have the stimulant that brings kind of that calm. I know adults that struggle, when they don't have their caffeine or whatever it is that they're even self-medicating with, as far as bringing themselves into focus and able to do with the job that they need to do. So I think providing that as a tool when it's appropriate,
And we
is
have
something I agree
kids,
with.
I have some students who have expressed to me at the high school level that their parents will not medicate, and so they self-medicate it with some things that are less monitored. So I would say, if your child is expressing to you that I am not in control of my body, you might want to look into that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, in mild cases, I think,
Yeah.
using the other
I wouldn't say it's a
alternatives,
first,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, not first round.
We're
No.
having rough time at bedtime every night, let's medicate them.
No.
Okay. Our 3-year-old is being disruptive during school nap time, crying a lot. Her teachers are working with her constantly to use her words, but what else can we do at home? She does not fight her naps at home.
It's probably the environment that she's in. She's not comfortable there. She's not
Yeah,
comfortable. She's
it-
not comfortable sleeping in that environment, whatever it is. I don't know who it was, but that asked that question. But I don't know if she's allowed to bring like her own pillow, her own stuffed animal, her own blanket. Something that makes her comfortable. And then maybe even having the child. I was the principal, but I was very hands-on. I would go into the nap time not to sleep, but to, although I really want, I'm like, can we just cuddle for a
I
second?
want them to bring back nap time in high school.
Sometimes I have nap time.
This feels so good right now. But just like actually rubbing the back and just, at 3, they still need that comfort. And so I think it's really important to make sure that the environment during the nap time at school is really, really, conducive to that child.
And there's certain things that are calming, just off the top of my head, thinking about, if they could brush or if they know how to like do certain things to themselves to settle down, or even like if the teacher could give her like a really tight hug to see if something like that, kind of that, again, looking at that proprioceptive input on your body, that pressure in your skin and your body, can be very calming to some kids. So kind of even working through some of those options. It's tough.
I used to rub their faces.
Right here.
like right here, and like they're naturally, if you put your hand up to somebody's face, they're gonna close their eyes, and if it's there a lot, they'll just close their eyes. So it just depends on. I think it's the environment, though.
You use the panda paw.
Yes.
What can I do as a parent to reinforce that my child can tell me how they're feeling? What can I do to help them open up more?
I would suggest to that person, whoever asked that, to read the book, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk, okay? Because that's a really great
good
read.
book. Yep.
And it has so many examples of the way that kids say stuff or don't say stuff to you, and how to, it's just example after example of kind of how to verbalize back to them, how to create an environment between you with your words that opens them up. It's hard to jump fully into that, but that would be like the top thing I recommend, is to try to read that book. But yeah, creating an environment where you take time to actually sit on their level. I know Anna mentioned earlier, like eye level is important. Things like, writing down their ideas. Like I said before, that's from that book. Reiterating what they're experiencing. So active listening techniques, when they're saying, I'm not sleeping at school, I feel frustrated, like, so you're feeling frustrated, and that's because you're not sleeping, and that makes sense, validating back to them, anything like that. Anybody have anything else besides that? It's a great read, though. I highly recommend it for everybody.
Y'all are wonderful. Yay.
Are we done?
Thank y'all. Yeah, y'all are done. Well, kind of done. If you have a question that didn't get answered, or if you have any additional questions, you can go out into the Grand Hall. Our experts will be out there for a few minutes to talk to you. But if you are a parent that would like to just connect with some other parents, you can stay in the auditorium, and we'll have pre or early education age over here, middle school in the middle, and high school over to the side. So if you'd just like to connect with some other parents, you are welcome to stay in here and see if y'all can connect. And we thank y'all for coming to this first Parents in the Know. Was it good? Are y'all looking forward to some more? Yay. Okay. Thank you for coming.